The windshield wipers are slapping. I'm heading up a dirt road, uphill. A little greasy on the tire, but the cider van will make it, I'm sure. I already see like maybe the sun's coming out again. It's hard to tell. Anywho, I'm headed to meet up with Cedar. He's making natural ciders, and what I mean by that is like wild ferment, foraged fruit from Vermont. And going to hear a little bit about that story on this here episode of Cider Chat. But I just want to tell you a little bit of the scene here. It's super green. It's July when I'm recording this, and it's been raining quite a bit this season in New England, and Vermont's no different. But it will come down, kind of pour, clean everything up, clean up the cider van here from all the dirt out of the road, and then the sun will come out. That's kind of a cool thing. So I'm enjoying that. And wow, it's just so beautiful here. Hello, my name is Rio Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. In this episode 375 of Cider Chat, we're going to be visiting with Cedar Hannan of Wildbranch Cider in Craftsbury, Vermont. We'll be getting to that featured conversation shortly, but first I have a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. If you're in this world, definitely subscribe to the Cider Chat YouTube channel for a lot of reasons. You know, of course, it's going to help Cider Chat, that channel itself, get more reach, but it's going to give you a direct input when I am releasing special videos. Most recently, there's a new Bottles on My Desk where I am talking about a cider. It's a little bit different than what I do on the podcast, and the most recent Bottles on My Desk is featuring an estate blend from Cockrell Cider in Washington State. And if you don't know about this cidery, I really want to recommend it. And that particular little video is of some forage mushrooms that I collected. I think I had three different mushrooms there. And cooked that and also put some of the mushrooms on some Pacific Northwest salmon. And that paired perfectly, I want to say, with this Washington State cider. And we're talking terroir, baby, here. That's what it's all about when you're drinking a local product like an estate blend from a cidery such as Cockrell. So check that out at the Cider Chat YouTube channel. And along with getting a notification of the Bottles on My Desk, those little releases I'm putting out, you also can get the podcast there and then certain specific videos. Most recently is the audio synced with the slide presentation of the talk on spontaneous fermentation. These are like wild yeast, and it was presented at CiderCon 2023. The presenter is Hughes Gerhard, and he did a wonderful job. So it's just the audio and the PowerPoint, and it's an education. You'll be able to like kind of stop it, look at the actual names spelled out clearly, really up-level your whole education in this really kind of hot topic, and something that I'm going to be talking with Cedar about shortly, our featured guest this week. So again, check out the Cider Chat YouTube channel, spread the word, share it. You know, if you have a cidery, you have a TV up there, let it roll. Just hit one of those YouTube videos like on spontaneous fermentation. Have that rolling up on your screen at the same time. I mean, I know, like, I like sports too, you know, and other things, but this is a nice way to be linking, you know, kind of a little bit of cross-promotion too, right? All right. Enough of that for now. I will be back to that, of course, because I love that YouTube channel, and it's slowly growing, trying to get up to like 500 subscribers now, and you can help. Up next, I have a little bit of info about one of our sponsors. Sweet, crisp, fresh, or balanced, whatever the cider you want to make, you will find the right yeast for your favorite cider in the Saf Cider range by Fermentis. This week, let's discover Saf Cider AC4. AC4 stands for Apple Crisp. This yeast is ideal to produce fresh and crisp cider. It ensures a very good assimilation of fructose and is excellent for low-gravity ciders. The results are an intensely fresh aromatic profile, meaning apple and floral, with a crisp mouthfeel, enhancing cider structure. Saf Cider AC4 is the perfect fit for highly fresh and crisp, sweet, and dry ciders. Want to explore diversity of cider profiles? Discover it all through the selection of yeast strains by visiting their website, fermentis.com. We are on week 2 of our 10-week focus trip discovering the terroir, sites, culture, and cider of Idaho. This week, we are still in the panhandle portion of the state, a little over 100 miles south of the Canadian border of British Columbia, in the town of Coeur d'Alene, which was originally the land of the Shitsuush tribe, whose name translates to those who were found here or those who are found here. They are also called the Coeur d'Alene tribe, which translates to heart of an all. And that is actually a reference to the tribe's special talent. I guess they were well known for, and I'm sure they still are, for bargaining and making good deals. And of course, the tribe is still in this area. A little bit more about this scene here. The discovery of gold happened in the late 19th century and really transformed the region, of course. And it led to the establishment of Fort Sherman by the U.S. Army in 1878. Then as the mining boom subsided, the area began to develop into a significant lumber producer. The city of Coeur d'Alene is located near a lake of the same name and has many recreational activities, as you would expect. Coeur d'Alene is also within 40 minutes proximity to Spokane, Washington. So this region, as you might imagine, really offers up a lot to the adventurous cider traveler. Visit the hometown cidery that takes the city's name, and it goes by CDA Cider. So that's Coeur d'Alene Cider. Besides having what looks to be a whole range of modern ciders, they also have a bottle shop, and the website totes over 100+ bottles of cider. So go Idaho. I mean, here you be up in the panhandle thinking, wow, where is the cider? Like, do they have apples up here? And then you walk into a bottle shop. Damn, that's good news, I would say. Anyways, here's a couple more tips. If you are in need of some cider making equipment, let's say you are in Idaho and you're getting some fresh pressed apple juice, which I will talk about a little bit next week, check out what is called Hop Stop Homebrew. Now, all homebrew shops, they're fermenters. And as such, they're going to have supplies for both brewing beer and fermenting fruits such as apples. So check out Hop Stop Homebrew. It's only 12 minutes to the west of Coeur d'Alene, and there you'll be able to find some cider making supplies. So I call that a winner chicken dinner deal. In next week's episode, we'll continue to head south in Idaho in search of cider supplies and orchards. To find out more, go to the Northwest Cider Association website. That is nwcider.com/map to map your route to Idaho. And one more tip, this coming Saturday, via the University of Idaho Extension Service, they have a fermentation club. And they're going to be having a class, I think it's like from 4 to 6 or something, and that's led by Katie Hitchcock, and it's all going to be on fermented foods. So I will have a link in the show notes to this here episode 375 on that class happening this weekend.
Bravo!
Up next, we're going to go to our featured conversation with Cedar Hannan of Wildbranch Cider. This is a Vermont-based cidery, and he's kind of new to being a commercial cider maker, but he's been making cider for a long time as an amateur, and that really gave him the confidence to move forward. So he's going to be talking about that journey. And what I really thought was kind of neat is how he's talking about the carbon footprint of cider and why that really impacted his choice on what type of fermentation, or I should say fermenter commercially, he wanted to be based on carbon footprint. So I'll let you hear him explain that. And I also want to make mention that I was there the week before the big flooding in Vermont that happened this summer of 2023. And Cedar is okay. His family is okay, so that's great. But there's still a lot of recovery happening in this area, and it's tough. It's really tough, not only for Vermont, but many people to just the west and over the New York border, down south here in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It's always something, isn't it? It's not easy, but we somehow keep on going forward. And you know what? I just want to say this. Life goes down better with a glass of cider in your hand. One more piece here. From time to time, you're going to hear a little bit of a clock ticking during the recording. And I put that in there because when I'm recording with a maker and we're sipping cider during the conversation, there is often a long span of time where we're not saying anything. And I want to just give you a sense of that we're not just sipping and talking immediately. We're trying to delve into that glass. And hopefully you'll get a sense that, yeah, there's a lot of open space there. And I'm just kind of honing it in and just giving you that sense of taste that happens in reference to each cider that we're going for. All right. Well, I think that's it for now. And I'm excited to really share this with you. This is my first time meeting Cedar. And one of the reasons I was excited is because I know that he does wild ferments. And he's just won a bunch of awards for his cider. So he's hit it right out of the gate, charging forward. And I think we're going to be really excited to watch the growth of his cidery. And he'll talk about what he wants for growth. That's kind of interesting too. But just really kicking out good products and making it the way that is kind of a special charm when you are a smaller producer. You actually have the time and longevity with a particular cider. So without further ado, let's all grab a glass and join this chat with Cedar Hannan of Wildbranch Cider, based in Craftsbury, Vermont.
Beer was my passion. It still is to some degree, and I kind of always thought someday I would open a brewery. I'd kind of, figured that would be a retirement type project and something I do, when I had kids were off at college or whatever. A couple of things conspired against that. I think, first of all, I was never a very good home brewer. I started doing that in my late teens, and while I made some good beers, I don't think I made ones that were necessarily better than what I could buy in the store. And then, I think also just sort of the beer market right now, especially in this part of the world, is fairly saturated. It just didn't really make sense to try and jump into that. There's also a lot of really good brewers in the area. I think 3 of the best ones in Vermont are right around here. In fact, if you draw a line from Lost Nation Brewing in Morrisville up to Hill Farmstead in Greensboro, and then over to Albany to Wunderkammer Beer, and then back to Morrisville, it makes a triangle, and we're sitting right in the middle of that triangle. So it's kind of the Bermuda Triangle of Vermont brewing, as I call it, and it just didn't seem to make sense to try and make beers in this area with not, knowing I probably wouldn't be able to make anything as nearly as good as what was out there.
Well, that's a nice compliment to those brewers.
Yeah,
sure
they're all fantastic people, fantastic brewers. And the other part of it, I think even that didn't quite dissuade me from it. I think it wasn't until I started kind of looking into the supply chain and of brewing and sort of the production, and I guess I have to be careful because a lot of my best friends are brewers and I love them, but I think looking at the carbon footprint and the impacts of brewing versus something like wine or cider. You're sourcing ingredients usually from around the globe. You're getting grains from the Midwest or from Europe. You're getting hops from the Pacific Northwest and increasingly places like New Zealand. And there's a lot that goes into that. And then you're boiling massive amounts of liquid using mostly fossil fuels. And then there's the refrigeration aspect. Pretty much everything is mechanically cooled. And these days, even a lot of brewers are insisting that the product be cooled right up until it gets to the consumer. Those things, comparing it to cider, were sort of where you're 100% locally sourced product. I mean, there's literally apples falling from the trees around here. The smaller cider makers were fermenting at ambient temperatures, so we're not really using much electricity and cooling. It seemed like it made more sense. I think, and I had been doing it as a hobby for probably 15 years before I started doing it commercially. I was, straight from the beginning, felt like I could make cider that to me was as good as most of what I could buy out there. Certainly not all of it, but felt like it was something I could actually contribute to kind of right out of the gate.
When did you become full-on commercial? This is pretty recent.
So I'm in my third full year, coming up into the, I guess, fourth harvest. The cider making was sort of, like I said, was going to be more of a retirement project. 4 years ago in December, I pulled out the Fedco seedling or seed catalog or nursery catalog and started circling apple varieties that seemed interesting. Placed an order for 100 apple trees, planted my orchard, thinking that, in 10 or 15 years when the apples were really producing, and then I would kind of transition from what I was doing in an IT career to cider making. As with a lot of people, I think the pandemic kind of changed their perspective and changed their timeline on things. For me, it was, I kind of decided I was in a job I didn't really like, working for a boss that was terrible. Got my hands on a really good source of mostly free apples and figured I'd just do a test batch and see how it went. Ended up with about 300 gallons worth. I filed for my permits. And I liked it enough to sell it that first year. So I ended up sort of jumping ship and making the transition a lot earlier than I expected to.
So that means that you're not doing any IT at this point?
That's true. And,
wow.
and
100% wild?
100% apples.
Wow.
And cider. The flip side of that is that it has to actually pay for itself. I'm not in a position to retire yet. So,
well, he's a young man, so he has a little bit of time there. Here you were. I'm going to go commercial right at the beginning of the pandemic. Just for the future listeners, we're recording this in the summer of 2023. So when he says 3 years ago, that is 2020, right when the world shut down. But I mean, what a beautiful place to be in quarantine, but what a kind of a terrifying moment when commerce everywhere is kind of like at standstill. Was there anything going through your head around that time, like going, oh, what am I doing?
If anything, it just seemed to kind of make more sense. I mean, it was a time when I think you feel like I really want to spend my days doing something I want to do, and that's fulfilling.
Definitely.
I guess the trying to predict what the market would be like, or the supply chain, or any of those things was a little bit daunting. But I started out at such a small scale that I felt like I just kind of got into it incrementally, sort of only bit off as much as I could chew or as much as I could afford, and figured if it all collapses, I can walk away and not be in debt and not have lost too much in terms of investment.
Yeah, so not a bad decision to make at all in the general scheme of things. You planted 100 apple trees 4 years ago. You're probably not getting high production out of those apple trees yet. Most of your apples are sourced then from foraging or from local orchards now? About
a third of all my apples are wild foraged apples that I forage for myself. Foraging was really just something that we did when I made cider and as a home cider maker, mostly just because there weren't enough apples in other places. So the rest of the apples come from commercial orchards, small backyard orchards, a lot of overgrown, kind of unmanaged orchards. 3 smallish commercial orchards that I source from. It's nice to be able to find some places that have these fancy cider apples from the UK and France, the Davenants and Benet Rouge and things like that. Had a lot of fun with seeking out some of those varieties. I would do more foraging. It's just, as anybody who's done it knows, it's a pretty labor-intensive process. I kind of have a rule that I pick all the fruit myself, and so I don't have another source of labor really, and so my foraging is kind of limited by what I can do myself.
That's a lot of picking to do, and not only just picking, but getting to the trees. Are these roadside apple trees that you've kind of marked off, or where are they? And I know this is like mushroom hunting. You could say, down a dirt road. Because you're not going to say, oh yeah, Route 100 at that mile marker. We don't let those secrets out. But is this tromping through the woods like up a hillside or?
Yeah, so, I mean, here on my own property, we have, I have 30 or 40 trees that I source from. I don't use a lot of roadside apples. I guess leave those for the other home cider makers, a little easier to get to. Nice. I have relationships with a couple of farmers that have really good concentrations of apples, wild trees, often in pastures or beside pastures or, hay fields or hedgerows. And so that's kind of where most of them come from. In terms of the volume, I mean, my entire production each year is only about 900 gallons in terms of finished cider. So I use roughly 400 bushels of apples total, and somewhere between 100 and 150 of those will be wild apples.
It's very labor intensive.
Yep.
And so looking on that long term, as one ages into being a cider maker, that's something to consider. So I guess your backup plan is to have that orchard that you planted.
For sure. And I forage because I absolutely love it. I've never sat down and tried to count up my hours and figure out what the true cost of those apples are, because I'm going to do it anyway. So,
right on.
To me it is, to be honest, I don't even know if I would be doing this in this business if I didn't have foraging as part of it, because that's just really, it is the most enjoyable part. I love my orchard and I love spending time in it, but even after 2 days in a row in my orchard, it kind of feels like going to the office, and I just want to get out and hit the hills.
Are your trees standard?
So I have about 2/3 of them are on M111, so a semi-standard rootstock, and then
how are those doing for you, the M111?
They seem to be doing well. Maybe even better than some of my standard rootstock trees.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know what accounts for that. It could be varietal, but
yeah.
So then, the other third is mostly on Antonovka rootstock.
And the Antonovka is doing okay, or okay,
yeah,
good to know.
They seem fine. I think variety wise, some of them, I kind of took a Hail Mary on a couple of varieties that probably just shouldn't be grown here in terms of
what
well, I think things like Dabinet, and I have some Medaille d'Or. I don't think that this is probably the best climate without a lot of management, a lot of intensive management, which I'm not doing. So those seem to be struggling a little bit.
And these are all Fedco?
Primarily.
Primarily?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so listeners know Fedco is based in Maine, and they've been selling rootstock and all kinds of, it's like a nursery, online nursery for many, many years. And really, John Bunker's like one of the founders of Fedco, and we all love John Bunker, who's an American apple treasure himself.
Yeah. So it's always exciting the day the nursery catalog comes out and you get to flip through it. And
he does most of the artwork, or if not all the artwork there, which is just like a reason to keep it for future archive. So just going back to the foraging, you talked about you have some agreements with landowners. Do you do that in like writing, or is that like a handshake up here?
Yeah, there's definitely nothing in writing. And it's either people that I know personally for the most part, or I might know they're a relative of theirs and have gotten permission through them.
Is there like a certain criteria that you're looking for in the apple?
I do one cider that's entirely made of wild apples. It's called Wild Squared. It's also wild fermented, hence the squared. And it can be hard because you don't have a critical mass of any one type or profile of apple when you're harvesting wild apples, because you're not going to have 10 trees that have the same thing. Each one is different. There's sort of the four main criteria that cider makers look for: the flavor, the tannins, the acidity, and the sugar content. And I would put aroma probably under flavor as well. And so I kind of start from the flavor perspective. If it tastes good, I'm going to probably use it. If it tastes interesting, I'm going to use it. No matter what the other components are like. If it doesn't taste good or it has very little in the way of flavor, I may still use it. It's kind of, if it has high sugar, which is something that is hard to come by in this part of the world especially for wild apples, it might still be of use. If it doesn't have good sugar or good flavor, then it's kind of, it's going to have really interesting tannins. Acidity is not something that we usually have trouble finding. There's a lot of the apples up here tend to be very, very acidic. So overall, I mean, it's probably half of the trees that I encounter that I just don't use the fruit from. They just don't have a lot going for them that I think is gonna add to the blend.
Let's talk about your cider styles and what you're doing, and specific to like your cider making. You're not using sulfites, so you're going with the naturally occurring sulfites that's in it already.
Right.
Are you using cultured yeast at all?
I do some cultured yeast.
Is that like a blend? So you'll start off with like a wild ferment and kind of let that go and then add it? Like, what's your process there?
Yeah, basically what it comes down to is my cidery being sort of not super temperature controlled. In the late fall when it cools off in there, I kind of don't trust the native yeast take off and start the fermentation, and I kind of want to give it a little help. I don't like it sitting in the tank too long without an active fermentation. So, later months in the fall, I will pitch a yeast, usually a wine yeast or a champagne yeast. And, the earlier fermentations, when it's still quite warm in there, I just kind of let them go naturally. And in terms of what ends up in the bottle, it's a blend. So with the exception of the wild squared that I do, which is a fully wild fermentation, the rest of my ciders will be a blend of those pitched yeast and natural ferments.
Is there a particular profile that you're hoping to deliver when you're making cider?
I try not to pay attention to styles at all per se, and I think the only time I do is the 2 times I've submitted things to Glint Cap, which is the big cider competition. And they make you pick a style category, so I have to put it in there somewhere.
Right.
Other than that, I kind of let the apples dictate it. I mean, I did a couple single varietals this year that just tasting the apples, and they're well known varieties that do well as a single varietal. One is the Ashmead's Kernel, and one is a Golden Russet. But they just tasting the apple, they just seemed like they had the balance already for what I was looking for. I like a fairly acidic cider. I was kind of, I think in some of my earlier versions, I toned it down because I really wasn't sure that there was sort of the market appeal for it, and I was kind of pleased to find out, and talking with a lot of my farmers market customers, that people really like those brighter, more acidic ciders. They weren't turned off by them. They weren't scared of them. So, I do like a brightness to them. Other than that, I just kind of, I guess I dictate what the wild apples are doing there that year, what I managed to source in terms of the different apples, both commercially and foraged.
I saw with your Perry, there's a little bit of haze in it, which is kind of typical. For your ciders overall, are you worrying about haze at all in your finished product?
Not much, although I have a couple that are sort of chunky enough that they're kind of beyond what I would like. There's a significant amount of chunky sediment in them that I wish wasn't there. So, but no, and I don't filter. Again, it's just another step that doesn't seem necessary. I don't worry about it, and it's. I think we can probably thank sort of the natural wine community for getting people accustomed to some sediment in their beverage.
I think it's the wine community needs to thank the cider community actually for that. Right. Truthfully, if I think who's been doing it longer, and just like, oh hell, I don't care, like little Pomona says, shake and wake, mix it in.
Yeah. And even the Belgians with their hazy wit beers, or the Germans, and
you would shake it up to pour it. So
I guess just some of my earlier farmers markets, I would sort of be almost apologetic about the sediment in my ciders, and people would be like, oh, it's okay, we drink natural wine, we understand.
That's beautiful. That's that's like music to your ears, isn't it? All right, now I could talk to you. No preconceived.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about your different ciders. Is there any cider that we could take?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do that.
I was hoping you'd ask.
Yeah.
This is the Spinney, which was the very first cider I made. My first year commercially, I only made one cider, and this was it. And it's sort of, I guess you could call it my flagship. This one I do kind of try and make similar every year. Medium to low acidity, kind of medium tannins, a nice appliness to it, I guess. Cheers. Thank you, Rhea. Good to see you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this cider here. So it's called the Spinney. It says on the label, dry sparkling cider from wild and heirloom apples. So, and the label itself is like a photo with a kind of a naked apple tree, it looks like, because it's like in the fall. And of course, your logo up there, and this like beautiful serving glass.
Yep.
It's not a wine glass, but it's like a stemless wine glass. And immediately, I got the nose. It's a little bit early. I think we're pre-lunchtime right now, so I'm gonna just let my palate kind of change into this mode. In fairness, sparkling.
It is. I tend to go a little bit on the low side in terms of carbonation. I don't like them too fizzy, but
beautiful clarity. The color is like a rich yellow straw, and you're getting like an invitation in the nose. Bright, nice tannin, not tannin bomb, but enough astringency to make you draw in and say, oh, I need to keep on whetting my thirst here. Let me go for a little bit more. Really delightful cider.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well done. A nice blend.
I guess the attempt with this was something that could be drinkable by itself, but I think it's kind of my favorite dinner cider as well. It's just a really nice food cider. A little bit of acidity to kind of cut through the richer tasting foods. And,
little softness too on the back. It didn't go through malolactic fermentation at all, but it has a little bit of that like softness on the back palate. This is a great standalone sessionable type. What's ABV on it?
It's about 6.8, I think.
6.8, yeah. And I could see where it'd go great with some like Vermont cheddar or
grilled pork chop with
pork chop.
yeah.
Oh baby, yeah. Or just like out fishing. Yeah, that would work too on the boat. Well done.
Thanks.
This is my first cider of yours I've ever tasted.
Wow.
I'm really impressed. I'm like, yum, yum. All right, he's walking to the refrigerator again. And that looks like the pear.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the pear is this year's bottling. The Golden Russet is, I'm not selling it yet. I think it needs another probably 3-4 months. But since you're here, why not
check it out? Okay.
Open it up and see how it's doing on its journey from...
We do love a Golden Russet.
Yeah.
Look at that, really sparkling, all natural.
Yeah, all bottle conditions.
Bottled condition, but with a crown cap on it. So listeners should know that you could get a sparkling cider with a crown cap. It doesn't have to be a cork and cage. And just beautiful. Again, a deeper, richer yellow, hue to it. It's almost like a golden amber color.
Yeah, this one's got a little more body to it. It's quite a bit stronger. This is the Golden Russet single varietal. It's 8.3%. Real intense fruitiness to it.
Totally different.
I think as
nose.
it warms, that'll come out, but it's a little cold.
Yeah, but wow, it's little like a cooked apple, a little bit on the nose.
Sort of leathery almost.
Damn, that's tasty. I know it's still young, so imagine where it's going to be. Wow.
It's going to be hard to hold that one back, but I'm going to try and give it at least another 3 to 6 months because I just think it'll be.
Oh, it'll be really like pronounced in the. It's showing itself now. It's like, okay, wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do get that leathery, bright, full mouth, the bit of tannin in there. I'm getting the yeast coming through. That's why I think you're wise waiting a little bit more so it kind of melds in the bottle. But how?
It's only 4 months in the bottle.
4 months in the bottle.
I kind of considered that to be the bare minimum, and really, most ciders I think need quite a bit longer than that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of what you're doing is that you have 900 gallons, so you're able to, make cider the way I like to make cider. And to drink cider, my 2017 is just tasting good now. Yeah. Of course, is there any left? No, but the last bottle was really good.
Yeah.
But cider really likes to sit. It only gets better. Like I would feel like people drink it way, way too early before it's time.
I think it's usually a year where I think it reaches sort of the high plateau, and it'll stay there for and sometimes even get better for at least another year.
Yeah.
If you have, particularly I think bottle conditioning, you're kind of sequestering some of that oxygen, so you're not having to deal with oxidation as much. It can really go for a number of years.
So Golden Russet, how's it doing up here? It must be a lot grown in this area, I imagine, or not?
I know a few orchards, and the one that I'm lucky enough to source from, I haven't checked in with them to see how the frost affected them. But it's kind of like everywhere. I mean, the vast majority of the apples are still going to be the eating varieties, like the Macintosh and the Honey Crisps and that sort of thing.
Right.
But certainly more orchards are starting to plant some of these older, cool varieties.
So is this 100% golden russet?
It is
100%. So single varietal. How many single varietal ciders do you have?
I just did 2. The other one is an Ashmead's Kernel.
Ashmead's Kernel,
which
I
is,
saw that, yeah.
That's going to need, I think, a year. It's
and that was bottled
around the same time, about 4 months ago, and it's it's I forget what it is, but I think it's over 9%. So it's a really heavy duty cider, higher acidity. So I think it'll hold up.
Really hold up for a while, yeah. Well, I think this is such a great reminder on how wonderful a single apple can be in the bottle. I mean, you can't go wrong with these like little russets that we have, especially in New England. I'll do a little bit of my New England love there in that way. Of course, Roxbury russet, is our treasured local apple, but this golden is just delightful. If you were to sell this today, folks would be happy, for the average, cider drinker, and including myself, I'd be really happy with this. And so it'd be a reason to buy 2 bottles to really sit on it, and watch it mature. Yeah. Well done, man.
Thank you.
I'm really, really impressed.
Yeah.
And this was...
Thank the orchardist, too.
Yeah, and what orchard is this from?
It's not it's sort of a very small commercial orchard. It's actually right up by Eden Cider, where their orchard is, just sort of down the road from it. It's just a guy named Larry Young and his son that have a few hundred trees. They just grow really nice fruit. Super privileged to be able to get apples from there.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that you didn't say acid, that you really liked a high, you didn't say acetic.
Right.
So there's a really big difference there. And I hadn't tasted your ciders, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get. But this is where the acid is really giving you that bright, popping taste. And helps the apple flavors pop in the glass. Versus it's not going acetic at all, which is a more vinegary. So I just want anyone listening to know that is not what you're going to get out of this particular bottle.
And I like the ciders. I like a little bit of acetic from time to time. I kind of made a decision that I was not going to try for that in any of mine.
That's probably a good way to go.
Yeah, partly just worried that am I going to be able to get rid of it, or is it always going to be there? So I'm pretty careful about trying to keep oxygen out, trying to minimize turbulence, and when transferring, I use CO2 to push things around whenever I can, or gravity. Just sort of trying to be as gentle as possible and not introduce too much post fermentation.
How soon after the apples come in are you pressing? Are you doing anything like sweating the apples, or what's that process? Yeah,
it really varies. I think it's depends on sort of where the apple's at. If they're super ripe and they're not, don't seem like they'll benefit too much from sweating, I might just go for it. I think some of the drier apples I tend to let go for a while, because they seem to sort of pick up some flavor, and you'll notice sort of like the skins get really aromatic after at least a few weeks of aging them.
So a few weeks of sweating.
It depends. Yeah, it really depends. And I have a fairly cold facility there, so I'm not sweating them at 80 degrees. I'm sweating them at 65 degrees.
You're storing them in that bottle room, that second room that we walked in?
Correct.
So that's a pretty tight room already. So how many baskets of apples can you get in?
Yeah, it's actually the very first, or the last room where the overhead door is.
Okay, overhead door, okay.
And I haven't figured out what I'm going to do this fall, because last fall that was empty.
Oh,
but
okay.
Typically I press in there, and I'll store the apples pre-press.
Yeah, because that's a big one, is the storage just for the apples alone. Of course, when do you start collecting apples? What month?
Late August.
Late August. It's still warm up here, and we've been having... Well, it seems like everything this year is starting later, in a way. The bloom was really early, but now we have this delayed, kind of cold, and we're getting, it's warm outside, but we could be looking at a very warm fall. Who knows, right, until we're done with it. So you go from late August through December?
No, for me, it's basically through October. I'll get some in November, but unless you're wanting to freeze the apples on the tree, there's things by mid-November start to get pretty cold up here.
Okay.
I think, and also, I'll do some foraging into November, close to December, but most of the commercial orchards kind of want to be done by end of October, middle of November.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One other apple going back to the sweating, the one that I sort of experimented with this year was yellow transparents, which are pretty much a useless cider apple, or supposed to be. But I basically let them go as long as I possibly could before they rotted, just sort of seeing if I could coax any sort of flavor or any kind of interesting thing. And I actually liked the juice okay. It wasn't bad. It was very low, it was pretty low sugar, but I don't think I'd do a single varietal out of it. But it was just sort of an experiment to see if I could make something out of an early season apple that nobody seems to want. So
Nice. And so you're feeling pretty good about it then?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
That wasn't a single varietal. That just went into the tank and is mixed in with some other stuff. But
the pears that you have in the Perry
those are just orchard pears. They're Bartlett's, and there's a kind of a local variety called Big Earl, I think they call them.
Big Earl. Okay.
They're, you'll get the pear flavor. It's not the Perry experience that you might expect from the UK, but.
Nice. Oh, now look at that little light pear.
Yeah, it's
color,
very delicate.
Huh? Hey, cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.
Wow, totally different color.
It's got a little pear funk to it. Maybe a little. No.
It needs to open up its nose a bit.
Yeah.
They do have attitude. Wow.
It's got a little bit of a salinity to it that I don't know where that's coming from, but.
Even though it's not Perry pears and they're pears, I always say like there's a bit of a spiciness that comes out of pears. And so that's what I'm getting, on the nose originally. When I say spicy, it's kind of, it's like a blend of different spices. And I can't really put my nose on. Sometimes it's peppery, but I get that. And then I get a little bit of the yeast, coming out. It's strong in that way.
Definitely some yeast. Might be a little sulfur in there.
Astringency right on the tongue, right in the center of the mouth. This pear needs to breathe in this glass for sure.
Yeah.
I think, in fairness to your cider making, this is going to really change in the glass.
Mm-hmm.
And when was this bottled? Same time?
December. So
December, yeah.
It's been there for a while.
So now that just like the minute or so, my nose has switched from the golden russet, and initially when you smell it, and I think this is so important for folks who drink cider, aren't making it, but just trying to get appreciation is at first you're like, whoa, okay, that's intense. Am I going to be able to drink that? But in fairness to what's in the glass, you have to reset the palate over and over again when you're drinking a whole bunch. So as I kind of reset, I take that first sip, try to not get judgmental, on it, because you go, oh, my brain's like going in different directions. And then you start going, oh, okay, this is not acetic. It's not a cider. That's also really good to know. This is not an apple, it's a pear.
It's interesting, that idea of, needing to let your palate adjust and kind of let it sink in is kind of the reason I'm not wild about doing tastings, like at wine shops and stuff. It just seems like you're setting yourself up for this sort of rapid fire cider experience, and it's just not the way. It's a tough way to get a good idea of a cider when you're tasting 3 or 4 in a row
It's just another thing that you have to inform drinkers to know. People don't think about that. I mean, no matter what you're tasting, that's why they serve endives during a dinner meal, so you go to the next process to reset your palate. Yeah. And I think maybe in our culture in the U.S., we're not used to that. Maybe more the fine dining at that kind of level. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is fine drinking, really. You're allowing, you're giving some credence to the process here.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I'm tasting this, the more I'm like, kind of, jumping into the glass. This is another thing. When I'm doing recordings and people just pour it in the glass, I really try to let it sit in the glass a little bit because it can make me sneeze.
Right.
And, you're kind of right. Like when you're doing a lot of tastings and you're doing rapid fire, that's a difficult thing to do. I'm the type of drinker where I just like, instead of going and trying multiple stuff, I like to sit on something. If I'm producing an episode and I have that maker's bottle, I'm just sitting there with that bottle, taking the 8 hours that it takes to produce an episode. I'm like letting that develop, and then it brings me right back to that place. And the nose is deceiving.
It is. It's sort of like a funk up front, which is usually you kind of get a little funk on the back end. But in this one, it seems to
I don't
be
mind
all
funk up front.
Yeah.
I like it. That's exciting for me. Now this would be something that I would recommend having with food.
It's funny because I actually tell people the opposite with this one. Yeah.
Interesting. I would say like goat cheese or some like soft cheese.
Yeah.
Like being in Donfronte or something like that in France, Perry, you want to have it with some kind of like nice, soft, rich type of cheese that
I guess I got to change my pitch.
Well, I mean, if you like drinking it like that, far be it for me to tell you the maker how to drink it. Yeah. But I think it would make it pop.
Yeah.
More in the glass, because the two are blending, and so you want like a good like farm type of cheese.
Something fatty to go with it, kind of bulk it up.
Yeah, that could elevate the whole experience there. Because alone, this is going to change a lot over the course of it sitting in the glass.
We got some Cabot cheddar if you want to try that.
Let's try it a little bit just to see. Cabot's always like the. I want to hear what you think about that.
Of Cabot?
Yeah, I mean, with this and your Perry.
Yeah.
It'd probably be like a different kind of cheese than the cheddar.
Yeah. So if you came in the fall, I make a raw milk camembert.
You make it?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Which, I mean, it's better than my cider, I'll tell you that.
Oh, really? Wow, man. Okay. Let's see what we got here.
It's a really good cheese, and it's, but I only make it a couple batches in the fall, and that's it.
All right, so we're tasting a little bite of the cheddar from Vermont Cabot. Your Perry's stronger than this cheddar. Like cheddar is like a soft kind of like with the russet, I would say.
Yeah.
But here, a good pairing they both should be like pushing the other forward. Mm-hmm. And I think the cheddar is just too of a mild cheese for this. If I was going to go for the russet, I bet that is.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that.
It needs that camembert. Mm-hmm. It's a good mushroomy, stinky camembert too.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
It
works with the fruitiness really well.
Yeah, with the russet.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. So that's where, when you're doing a tasting, for us to be able to talk about this and go through that experience, you do that with friends, that is really freaking fun.
Yeah.
That's like the beauty of like getting into like the foodie experience of it. And I have this Cabot now with that russet, and now that's an experience.
Yeah.
That's an experience. The Perry is like, hell no. Give me something that's going to like get up to snuff where I'm at.
Yeah.
Right? Can you, am I right on that or what? Because, I could drink this Perry alone, but it's just kind of good to have food with
always. Cider is made for food.
Made for it. And so that with some kind of rich, buttery, or funky cheese would just really do it. So, Cedar, I want you to give me a report back when you do that with your camembert.
With the camembert, I will.
I know. I'm gonna like hunt you down and say, okay, man, have you done it yet?
I'll send you a wheel.
Yeah. Let's see. So this is with the spiny. With your spiny too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the piece about food pairing is it's kind of like when people do a fruit cider. You still want the apple there, but you want to get a little touch of the fruit. So here, I'm getting the cheddar, and I'm still getting the cider. And the two are walking down the altar together. Mm-hmm. It's not one before the other. And that's what I'm looking for in a food pairing. Here, your perry with the cheddar is the perry still walking down the altar saying,
by itself.
I'm already down, and, catch up with me if you can.
Where's my groom?
Yeah. It's not going to work. So while we're talking here, let's get into 5-year plan for Wildbranch. What are you thinking?
It's really underwhelming.
Underwhelming?
Yeah. I have. It's not that I don't have ambition. It's just, I'm very incremental in what I do, and I'm really just looking at sort of fine tuning and moving forward slowly. Mm-hmm. I think, the primary goal is really just to try and make better cider every year than I did the year before.
That's a good goal.
Yeah, and not necessarily an easy one. A lot of variables and moving targets and stuff, but improve the cider, maybe little efficiency improvements, although I don't get too hung up on that. Mm-hmm.
So kind of staying at the size that you are,
pretty much. I mean, I figure, I can go up to, I'm doing about 900 gallons now. I could go up to 1,200 in that space without, much
needing an addition.
Yeah.
Or kicking the cows out.
Right.
You don't want to do that.
That's not going to happen.
Good.
I need them for the camembert.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I don't want to add infrastructure really. I mean, it's a big investment. And I have a lot of self-imposed constraints in terms of growth. One of which is that, as I already mentioned, I want to pick every apple myself. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like that relationship with the fruit. I like the time spent doing it. It allows you to really kind of contemplate, that apple and what it could be used for. That's kind of where I spend most of the time thinking about what I'm actually going to do with it. Whereas if somebody else is picking it for you and the fruit just arrives, you're just kind of like, okay, I've got a bunch of apples. Maybe you taste them, you start pressing them, and don't think as much about it. You just have that time in the orchard to not do much else other than think about the fruit and the cider.
So if you were going to start this over, 4 or 5 years ago, when this is a little pipe dream, anything that you'd say do this a little different?
That's hard to say. I mean, I think because I sort of grew so slowly and maybe not methodically, but cautiously, that there isn't a whole lot that I do different. I mean, certainly in terms of my orchard, that night in December, circling cool-looking trees in the Fedco catalog is probably not the best way to plant an orchard. You might want to talk to a few orchardists and find out what.
That's a good tip.
What's going to do well, what isn't. On the other hand, I don't think that ever would have worked for me. I kind of have I just kind of like to jump into things, and it's not that I'm arrogant and think I'm not going to make any mistakes. I just also know that if I sit back and start researching it, I'm kind of going to get paralyzed in kind of making everything perfect. And so for my personality, it worked to just circle those trees and order them and see what happens, and knowing that I would make some mistakes. And those mistakes are becoming my heart-grafted trees in the orchard right now. Anything that dies gets, put into some cool wild variety that I graft in there, and that's sort of part of the process.
Part of the process, yeah. It'd be nice if you don't have to take down a tree that you planted, but there's always an exit plan.
There's always voles to take care of a few of them for you. There's always apple borers to kill a few trees.
Right. Exactly.
So, and I think, in terms of it's hard to, anybody who starts a small business knows that you kind of instantly have to be an expert in a whole lot of areas that you may not be trained or equipped to be. And I think I made the decision to sort of pick a few areas that I thought I could handle, that I either had an interest in or maybe an aptitude for, and then with the understanding that I would outsource some of those things as well. I didn't want to have to pick up the phone and call a lawyer every time I had a question about my business or licensing or permitting or label approval or that sort of thing. And so I made a decision to commit myself to sort of being my own expert on that sort of stuff. On the other hand, I have no skills in graphic design or art, and knew that I didn't want to start a new career in that. And so I paired up with a really good graphic designer who's done wonderful things for my labels. And
Can we give them a shout out?
Alex Peltz at Peltz Creative.
A local Craftsbury?
Quite local. He's right over in Woodbury, so about
Nice.
2 towns away. But he and his wife run a little 2-person design firm, and they
Beautiful
great
designs
work.
on your labels.
Yeah.
I mean, really inviting. Feels very Vermonty, which is what you want, but with that kind of like almost like a folk art on that pear label, especially. It's just delightful, and that wild branch. Each one's really unique, but within the same theme, which I like. Nice. And where do we find your ciders?
Well, about 60% of all my ciders sold at farmers markets here in northern Vermont. So I'm at the Stowe Farmers Market every other Sunday, and then I alternate Saturdays between the Burlington and Montpelier farmers markets.
So May to October, you have a chance to get Wildbranch.
Yep, and then other than that, I do have about 15 retailers that carry my stuff in northern Vermont. My mostly up-to-date website is wildbranchcider.com, and you can find a list of retailers that carry my stuff. Do not ship. I do not distribute out of state. That's probably another sort of philosophical thing. But so I get asked to ship every now and then, and usually I ask them where they are, and I look up three cideries I'm familiar with in the area that make really good cider, and I tell them to buy from those local cider makers instead of trying to get my stuff shipped. So support your local cidery, wherever they are.
Right on.
There's great cider everywhere in the United States right now. So.
Well, I want to wish you the best of luck with
Thanks.
your endeavors here. You're obviously a fine cider maker, only getting better on your path. I'd be really curious to, as the years pass, to see how this changes and develops, both your business plan and your ciders themselves. But you are, from all eyes on this cider right now, you kind of hit it out of the ballpark running. Now the key is to kind of stay at that pace and keep your own sanity.
Yep.
But thanks for taking the time to talk.
Thank you, Rhea. It's great to finally meet you, and appreciate everything you do for the cider community. You're probably the biggest promoter that I know of for people like me. So thank you.
Before I roll out of here, and before you start making plans to go visit Wildbranch Cider in Vermont and go to one of those farmer markets and load up, you could also be thinking about an upcoming cider festival that's taking place on the West Coast in California. So this is called the Central Coast Cider Festival, and it's been absent for 3 years, and you know why, because there was something that happened to all of us in this world, and that's not fun. Look, there is a lot of cider in that area. In fact, I have a bottle that I'm going to be tasting on one of my bottles on my desk from a Paso Robles cidery winery. That is a Thatcher winery. Maybe they'll be at the Central Coast Cider Festival. That would be cool. I know there'll be a lot of great ciders here because there's a lot of amazing ciders. Let's see. They have a little list here. Gopher Glen Cider, Kelsey Sea Cider Vineyards, Sycamore Ranch Cider Works. Know those folks. They're really fun. Tin City Cider. That's a little further north. And Blindwood Cider. That's by Oakland. Durham Cider, Shindig Cider, Slow Cider, Mount Diablo. The list goes on. So if you are hankering for a cider festival, you want to get your tickets now, I'll put a link in the show notes, or you could just Google Central Coast Cider Festival in California, which I like to consider the surf side of Ciderville. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville. We drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Yeehaw!